veče, gledate Prva intervju. Naš večerašnji sagovornik je profesor Adil Nadžam, koji je dekan jedne od najvažnijih škola na Bostonskom univerzitetu. Škole na kojoj se izučava budućnost u dugoročnim kategorijama. Za nas to možda deluje čudno, ali za ostatak sveta to je veoma važna tema. Profesor je u sklopu onoga čime se bavi pokrenuo i jedan veliki projekat i razgovarao, intervjuisao gotovo 100 najvećih svetskih mislilaca iz raznih oblasti, tražeći odgovor na pitanje kako će izgledati svet nakon koronavirusa. To je i tema našeg večerašnjeg razgovora sa njim. Idemo na blok reklama i krećemo sa razgovorom. Ponovo smo u studiju, krećemo sa razgovorom. Professor Nadžam, thank you for your time. You are intensively searching answers what will be or what will look like world after the coronavirus. After almost 100 interviews with leading thinkers in various fields, from public health, ecology, geostrategy to art, what are the 3 most important insights which you have acquired about politics, economics, and society in the post-corona era?
So thank you. We learned a lot. I learned a lot. You know, I've been calling this my project of learning. It's like going back to college, because all these wonderful, really smart people from around the world have been very kind to talk to us. I learned many things, but one most of all, and that is that the title we gave it was wrong. And we called it World After Corona. And the biggest lesson I've learned is that the world after Corona is already here. That this notion I had that, you know, this Corona crisis comes and there was a world before it, and then this will end and we will go to another world or we will go back to that old world is wrong. It's nonsense. That there is already a new world that has been created and is being created by what we are doing. There is a new global politics that's been created. There is a new global economy that has been created all across the world, right? Jobs are being lost, international assistance is being changed, economic alliances are being changed, supply chains are being changed, and most importantly, there is a new society and new habits that are developing, right? This habit of talking on online. In some ways, so that's the biggest lesson. A second lesson related to that is that it has been a moment of acceleration. That it is not that new things have happened. So Corona is new and it's still going on and we are still waiting for a vaccine. But all of the things that were waiting to happen, right, that were right at the cusp, have suddenly been accelerated because of this. So just like the virus tends to be more in, you know, if you have existing conditions, if you have existing problems, they become more because of the virus. Exactly the same with society, economy, politics, that whatever our problems were, they have been accelerated. So if there was a problem of nationalism and democracy, it has become more. If there was a problem of globalization not really helping everyone, it has become more. But similarly in technology, a lot of technologies that would have happened anyhow over 10 years have happened in 10 months. Right? So it is a moment of acceleration. And the third and final, since you asked for 3, is that there are going to be changes to global order. In some ways, this is a seismic event, not because of the disease, but because it has forced those changes. And in history, I think there are very few historical moments, but we will remember this as a moment of many changes.
You ask your interlocutors, and I ask you, what do you think we haven't learned yet?
Thank you for, I think we haven't always learned that the change is happening already. I think too many people, even people in very important places, are kind of trying to wait this out. They're thinking this is like another storm, right? A storm comes, you close your windows, you stay indoor, you get a lot of food, and you say, when it goes away, I will clean up. I think too many governments, too many people are still in that mode. right? I spoke to people like Noam Chomsky. I spoke to people like Enrico Letta, the former prime minister of Italy, about the EU, for example. One of the things all of them were clear about was whatever you need to do now. And in many ways, I think the lesson we haven't learned is that lesson that we need to be doing and thinking about the change now rather than waiting for this to end. The one group that has learned that lesson, I think, is the technology and business people. They are pushing ahead. But there are too many governments, too many people who are in holding pattern. Once this is over, I will see what I need to do.
Let's talk about two governments, governments of China and America. The clash between them is intensifying, speeding up, as you said. You said that the world should not become a playground of superpowers, but how to avoid it?
In many ways, I am afraid the world is becoming a playground of this superpower rivalry. As you said, we've done nearly 100. And the one topic that has come up the most often is China. Not the US, China. It does not matter what I'm asking them about. I may be talking to someone in India about Indian politics, they will bring in China. I may be talking to someone about art and literature, and China will come in. I will be talking about trade in Latin America. China will come in. I will be talking about Europe, China will come in. So in some ways, the other big story is, the story is not just the clash of China and the US, which is clear, but it is the story of the rise of China. In some ways, China was already rising, right, before this.
Are we talking about...
Especially
yeah.
economic. Yeah, economically, it was already on the rise. It was becoming a more important power. But what this crisis did is it forced it to become more prominent. Because the US has a president like Mr. Trump, that turned into an even bigger power. The lesson, I think, is we have a saying in many parts of the world that, when elephants fight, it is the ants that get trampled upon. And the fact is the elephants are fighting. And the fact is elephants will continue to fight. And more and more and more other countries are beginning to be forced into choosing sides. And as if, which side you are in. And that's not healthy. That is not healthy. It is not healthy for trade. It is not healthy for economics. So that's a big story, but it's not a story where I know how it will end. In many ways, I think there is an election coming in the US that may change things. There is also a lot of thought in China that they don't want to overheat it. But while I hope it will not be overheated and become violent in any way, I do think the China-US clash is now not only inevitable, it is here.
Mm-hmm. Are we so frightened about that? Can we realistically judge what's happening?
No, I think we can't and we shouldn't. Mm-hmm. It is not possible, and we should not try to figure out who's the winning side or not. There is an existing great power, the US, which is still a great power. It is not a story of US decline, right? It is not like a great power certainly went down. It is a story of a great power that is there, and it is another story of another great power emerging. And you cannot expect the existing great power to just sit and let that happen. So we are seeing that in trade protectionism. We are seeing that in the East Asian countries and the East China Sea. We will continue seeing that again and again and again. The question, the historical question is that can we see this great power rivalry without the type of conflict that history has usually imposed on us? I hope we can, but I do not know.
Mm. Popularity of authoritarian leaders is growing. For example, Mr. Trump. Those who stand up and say, I will take care of this or that. Your conclusion is that we will pay the price by reducing liberties. Why did you conclude that?
Yes, not just my conclusion. My guests are saying, Francis Fukuyama is saying that there is a transaction, a contract being made. This was happening even before Corona, right? A transaction being made where electorates, countries, people, ordinary people, are wanting strongman leaders, right? They're wanting strength in their leaders. They are wanting leaders who can say, I will break this. I will be better than them. I will make you great again. And that was already happening. And what Corona has done is it has given that sort of a leader a platform to demonstrate that sort of nationalism. So what is the very first thing that happened with Corona? It should have. But what is the very first thing? Walls went up, right? Stop the flights, close the airports, stop anyone from coming in. That feeds into this transaction that give me more power so that I lock you down. However, here is something. Ian Bremmer, one of my guests, pointed this out. Many others did. If you look now in September at what has happened, what you find is which countries have done well, which countries have done poorly. What you find is that it's not that strong leaders have done well and democratic ones haven't, or authoritarians have done better than democratic, or large or small, or
poor,
Asian or
yeah.
It is not that at all. Apart from the fact that we find women leaders have done well everywhere.
Yeah.
That is the one fact. But apart from that, what we find is it is not the nature of government. It is the competence. It is just how good you are at governing, whatever way. So New Zealand does well, but so does Vietnam, right? And I hope the lesson of this will be that good government and good governance doesn't come from trading away my rights. It comes from creating the societal trust so that smart policies can be implemented.
Yeah. Do you see the difference between a strongman and a leader? Many of your interlocutors, as you said, emphasize the importance of leadership. Is it competence a key word?
I think what I was surprised at, competence became a key word because this was an administrative crisis also, right? You have to make new rules, you have to have uncertain signs. So competence has become, but I think leadership has also emerged as a very defining feature and difference from simply strength. And leadership, in the sense, my guests keep saying, leadership is the other word that keeps coming again and again and again, right? And I think what they mean by leadership is not just the ability to be the strongest person in the room, but the ability to influence people to do what you're asking them to do. Because what coronavirus did was that it forced us to ask people to do different things. We have to put a mask. A mask is not a comfortable thing. It is not a natural thing because we are not used to it. So unless I can convince you, lead you to go to a place where you trust me, to change your lifestyles, it doesn't work. And that is why I hope that we have been learning new ways of leadership as opposed to simply strength. One of the interesting things is, I've said this before, I had never thought that the world would worry more about, or a country would worry more about how many masks it has or how many ventilators it has, rather than how many tanks it has or how much oil it has, right? Yet in June and July, that is how you measure the strength of a country.
We are witnessing the breakdown of global cooperation. There is no global response on global crisis. The United Nations, the IMF have failed. Is it because their frames are set for a different threats? For tanks, not for masks? And who should and how should run the United Nations or the International Monetary Fund?
I am so glad you raised that, but let me suggest something. I do not think the United Nations and international institutions failed. I think we failed. I think countries and country leadership failed in this most global moment to utilize the global structures that we had. Right? So this is one of the other big surprises, not lessons, but surprises. The surprise was that in this most global crisis, in this most international crisis, which is everywhere in the world, right? It's a global institutions were totally missing. right? David Miliband, who used to be the foreign minister of the UK, United Kingdom, in my interview, we were talking about this, and he says, where is the global response? There is no global response, right? And he is right. And that is a surprise. And it's a surprise not because we didn't have the institutions. We do have the WHO. It is a surprise not because the UN doesn't have the ability. It is the surprise because in this moment, countries went close. We closed our doors. So we wasted the institutional infrastructure we have created over 70 years. Now, yes, that could be a failure also of leadership of these institutions, but not just the UN, the EU. Right? Later, I think it's done better, but right at the beginning, when Italy is rising, Germany and France sort of closed themselves, not just the UK with Brexit. So in this moment of internationalism, we found that we were lacking in being a truly global planet.
So on what basis global cooperation should be built for this after Corona era?
I think the basis of experience, I hope what it will be built on is this. What we found was how much we had to spend by not being prepared. Right? I work on climate change and other issues. Remember when the Paris Agreement was held and there was this number 100 billion? The world will spend 100 billion. 100 billion looked like such a big number, and it would never come. Yet when coronavirus comes, this little thing you can't even see, which is not even living, countries, the US brought up $1 trillion in 1 week and then spent it immediately. And I hope the basis of international cooperation will be how much cheaper it is, how much more effective it is to do something before rather than wait for the crisis. Let me play a little mind game with you. Mm-hmm. If I could transport you back in time to January, okay, and in January I ask you, give me $1 billion and I will magically remove coronavirus. Do you think you would have given me $1 billion, or would leaders have spent $1 billion? Yes, at this point, if they knew what they know now, right? If they knew what they know, what was really going to happen, $1 billion would have been a great deal, even for small countries. But we didn't choose to do that. We didn't choose to make precaution. I hope that's the only basis of international cooperation. That is the smart thing to do, but I am not sure we are wise enough to do it.
That is my next question. Why we didn't prepare for health calamities as for the wars? How to understand globally what security really is?
Because we are arrogant. Because we are an arrogant species. We are not as smart as we think we are. We think we are a very smart species. There is no evidence. The only change I would make in how you phrased it, we actually do prepare for war. Right? Think about how much we spend for preparing for wars that don't happen.
Right, of course.
Right? We make these huge armies so that war doesn't happen. It is the single biggest expenditure. The question is, why don't we prepare like we prepare for war? So that disease doesn't happen.
That's right.
Right? When it comes to health, we say, well, it may not happen, so let's not spend. And the fact is, because I think we are still structured in this mindset as if security is only about military. This was a security threat, right? So what is a security threat? A security threat is if your people are threatened, right? If another country threatens your people, will you not find it a security threat? How is this not a security threat, right? Our liberties were taken away from us. We couldn't go to work. We couldn't stand next to each other. We couldn't go to our churches or our mosques, right? This is a security threat. The question is to leaders, why didn't we prepare for this like we prepare for war, and why shouldn't we prepare in the future? Because here is the other thing the experts are clear on. We knew this was coming. We didn't know the exact details, but for 20 years, we've been talking about pandemics. Pandemics have been coming. We know the next one will come. I can tell you that now. I can't tell you when or where, but I can tell you it will come. So why don't we prepare for it like we prepare for war?
Why?
I think because war sells. And I hope that, we will become wiser and we will learn. I hope, and so leadership, what does leadership mean? I hope the leaders who are emerging will be able to rally their parliaments and their taxpayers and their countries to say, let us change. Right? I do think there will be a new emphasis on healthcare after this, but I hope it will be the type of emphasis, let us prepare for this like we prepare for war so that we don't have to fight it. Right? In a way, it's like insurance. And that will take a different type of leadership.
We are in economic confusion. You said that it's difficult even to describe it with words and terms used so far. The recovery plan must be massive as after First or Second World War, but who will devise and implement some new Marshall Plan?
Yeah, I think we keep saying Marshall Plan. I do not see anyone willing to do that right now, and I do not see anyone able to do that right now. I think the EU, the Europeans have been slightly better because they have better institutions. But for most part, what you are seeing is countries going inwards and making their own recovery plans. And the question is recovery to what? Right? So in a way, think about this. Was the world a great place in January? Right? What were you doing shows on? Had we solved every other problem in January? Was it the perfect time? I'm not sure it was. I don't want to recover back to a time that got us to this time. So the question is, will these be recovery plans, meaning we pay off for the same to create the same problems we were in before, or truly a transformational plan? Right? And a transformational plan would be green, for example. It would say, okay, this is not about resurrecting, saving the doomed coal plants. This is about creating a new economy. And I think that's where the difference will come. Another big difference, I do think, is the debt. Debt at every level, from individual to national and international. I think this time that is such a big fundamental underlying element of the economic problem that our tools that we used to have will not work, right? The tools were, I will give you debt so that you can recover. So in some ways, I think this is not a challenge of recovery, economic recovery. It is a challenge of economic reimagination. One of the people I spoke to was the economist, the French economist Thomas Piketty, about inequality, right? If we recover, we'll go back to the same inequality. And what he's saying is that the way to reformulate is take the tough decisions that you could not have taken in January, right? There are many economic tough decisions that should have been taken in 2019. Now might be the time to do that. And that means a different type of taxation. That means a different type of debt distribution. That means a different type of equality distribution, right? So in many ways, let us not waste the crisis by recreating the problems we were in before the crisis.
Jeremy Corbyn, during your talk, said the superiority of an individual with money has been shaken. The idea of collectivism emerged as an opposite. What should and can this collectivism be?
I think partly I would say that's a hope rather than a fact just yet. In some ways, the fact was that the virus doesn't really check if you are rich or you are poor, right? The virus is the virus, affects everyone. However, that is not entirely true, because when I am rich, I can choose to stay at home and work online. When I'm not rich, I have to make a living and I have to go and I become a frontline worker. So while the pathology works equally, the impact doesn't work equally. In some ways, that is like natural disasters. When earthquakes come, no one dies because of the earthquake. You die because the ceiling falls on your head. And if you are poor, your ceiling is more likely to be weak and therefore fall on your head. Same thing with health disasters, right? So those who didn't have the means were more at risk. The question about collectiveness is that you also had a lot of social unrest. right? And we are seeing that rising again in this period, for example, with the Black Lives Movement in the US, right? Imagine this again as a journalist. What were the pictures you were seeing all the time back in January, February, right? It was pictures mostly around the world, young people angry on the street, right? In the US, in Lebanon, in London, in Chile. Everywhere you had Greta, everywhere you had young people who were saying, we are not getting the deal we were promised. And that anger is still there. So your question, where will the solidarity come from? Where will collective come from? If it comes from somewhere, I hope it will come from the young people. If they can redirect the anger into positive change, that I think is the best hope. If we don't let them do that, then the anger becomes violence. The anger becomes anarchy.
Let's stay on this topic. Noam Chomsky said we should ask, is this the world we want to live in? A world where the key decisions are in the hands of greedy, unreliable private institutions. He said, there is a chance that the world of after Corona will be similar to the world of before Corona, but with even greater privilege for private wealth and corporate power. Another option is to step outside and create a different world. It will depend, Chomsky said, on the strength we put in the fight. That sounds fantastic, but is it possible in reality? What makes our strength in that fight?
It may become necessary. It may become necessary, right? You are right. It's not easy. The choice is, and it's not. The interesting thing is the wonderful quote you said from Professor Chomsky, is the exact same type of idea that many people, people who are totally opposed to his ideology, right? Whereas Francis Fukuyama says the same. Most of our economists say the same. The choice is, there is a disaster. If we are going to rebuild, if going to do something, do we go back to where we were before this? Or do we reconstruct a new vision? And every smart person is saying this is a time to reconstruct. Where will the strength come from? It will come from the enormity of the shock. I think about it in this way. We were forced to do things that we never thought we could do. If I had said to you in Boston or wherever in Europe, we will remove half the cars from the road, you would have said, nah, that's not possible. We will take 90% of the office workers to work from home. No, that's not possible, right? It became possible. If I had said there would be a $1 trillion recovery plan for unemployment in the US, everyone would have said, no, not possible. It became possible. So the strength comes from the crisis itself. If we actually think, if we are uncomfortable enough with the status quo, that we are willing to make the sacrifice, because change doesn't come easy, right? So the question is, are we going to choose to go back, or are we going to choose to go forward? Because where we are, we cannot afford to stay. Right? Another interesting thing in this is Chomsky does this, but other people do this. Many people were comparing this to about 100 years ago, 1913, 1914. Right? We think of that period as a world war and so on and so forth. But what happened societally is, and the reason the wars maybe also happened was that there was a real transformation. The world before could not be like the world after. The world after couldn't be like the world before. And in many ways, that is what I think people are hoping this will be. Whether it's Piketty, whether it's Chomsky, whether it's Fukuyama, whether it is Graham Allison, what they are saying is we need to reimagine, not just return.
You said this is an educational moment. We have never had more information. However, we have never been attacked by so much fake news. How to cope?
I think that is it is an educational moment, but it is also because it comes in this moment of information overdose, right? You've seen sort of so much. And I don't know, on that one, I haven't yet figured out where we are. Did the availability of so much information help people? Has it trained us to be able to see which information is credible or not? Or has this influx of so much information and so much bad information also just drowned us so that we are not looking at science as well? I asked a number of our science guests how they thought science had done, right, in terms of information and knowledge. And they were split. On the one hand, they were sad that people were not really looking towards science for the answers, that they were looking for social media rather than scientific advice. On the other hand, I think many of them were also very proud that science and scientists had come to the forefront and worked overtime, right? Writing more papers, doing more research, working on vaccines. We don't have one yet, but still working on them on a speed we haven't seen. So I think that is one of those unfinished stories of where not just science, but knowledge, as opposed to information, comes in, right? Because this was not a moment about information, it was a moment about knowledge, right? And this goes again to competence, right? So competent leaders in countries which were able to do better were the leaders who were able to respect knowledge, as opposed to simply try to frame information by their tweets or their speeches.
Responsibility might be another key word for this time. A lot is in our hands, meaning responsibility on personal level. But so many people run away from personal responsibility because of tradition, upbringing, lack of education, social trends, etc. How to deal with the importance of personal responsibility for ourselves and others, from whether we will wash our hands or wear masks, to who we choose to lead our countries?
I think one of the reasons this has been a difficult moment, remains a difficult moment for us here in the US, I'm teaching classes, and is because of what you said. Suddenly, it wasn't just the governments who had to act, right? So on many of these issues, I can say, well, the government has to do this. The policy, they have to do this. They have to implement. I can push it. This was about me, right? I wear a mask or I don't wear a mask. How I work with my kids, how careful I am. And in some ways, this is also as a health issue different because I wear a mask not only to protect myself. I wear a mask because I have a responsibility to protect others from me, right? The mask is stopping my breath also. So in that sense, I think it elevated, it increased the challenge on individual people. And I think we all found that was difficult. So I hope we also get a new respect for those who do have to run governments, that it is not easy making those decisions. Making a decision saying other people go wear a mask is easier than doing it yourself. Asking other people to change their habits is easier than to change it yourself. So I think at a personal level, we learned a lot of new lessons, right? My learning was at the sort of intellectual level, but all of us learned new lessons at individual level. We learned the lessons of our own actions. We also, I hope, learned the lesson of respecting the work of others that we had not respected. Understanding that person at the grocery store, how important that person is to my life. Understanding how important the postman is to my life. Clearly understanding how important the nurse is, the doctor is in the hospital. Understanding how important that ambulance driver is, right? So I hope out of this not only comes a sense of personal responsibility, but also a sense of recognizing who our heroes are, right? Who are the people who make the world we enjoy possible? And learning that it is not just who's on the Forbes list of the richest people, right? The whole idea of essential service has been totally redefined in this process. I hope those are the things we will not forget once this is over.
One of your intellectuals said, we must turn this moment into a movement. The knowledge from this moment should be turned into permanent action. How far are we from that?
I think that is also a hope, a wish, a prayer, but an important one. Right? We spoke, for example, to Ibram Kendi on racism in the US, right? And that is one area, for example, where this is again very, very relevant. Unfortunately, our history suggests that in times of crisis, we all come together, and then as soon as they're over, or sometimes even before that, we give up and go our separate ways. Right? And this goes back to this idea of going back versus going forward. I do not know if that will happen. I really don't. I hope it does, but I will. If I were betting, I will. I'm not sure how I will bet, because it will require a type of wisdom that we as individuals have usually not demonstrated.
Let's go on a short commercial break now, and after that, my last question for you, Professor. Idemo, dakle, na blok reklama. Ponovo smo u studiju i moje posljednje pitanje za profesora Najama. Professor, you run a school where you deal with the future in the long range. In the Balkans, the long range future is complete utopia. We are not educated, nor it is in our tradition to think in those categories. Our folk wisdom says, you plan, God laughs. So help us to understand why it is so important to think about the future in the long range.
Thank you. The Pardee School is a school of global studies. We look at global issues, and when we look at global issues, one of the things we find is that every important issue is long range. Everything that is worth doing is long range. I obviously don't know your folk traditions as well, but I would hope that when you plan, God smiles. And if God laughs, I hope God laughs out of happiness that you are doing something right. Right? The one lesson about the future I have learned through my life is that the future arrives much earlier than you think.
Professor?
That the future arrives much earlier than you think, and the present, even as we speak, becomes the past. So the only thing to really think about is the next step. Plus, it is very clear, it was clear even before coronavirus, it is clear now, that in times of change, you cannot bank on what was only. You look at what was so that you can think about what can be. Right? And I think sort of that is the thing. In some ways, you are right that the coronavirus has made many people think even in shorter times. Right? People are worried just about getting past this, get past this week. Right? We've been sort of holed up in homes, and I worry that in some ways we have become more myopic, more focused. And that is why we did this series. We started the series in March, and we said, okay, this is going to go finish, and then there will be some after. So I do think the future is more important, and in some ways, the future will belong to those who think about the future. The future will belong to those who take the future seriously.
Professor Najam, thank you very much for your time. Bio je ovo intervju sa profesorom Adilom Najamom, koji je napravljen u saradnji sa letnjom diplomatskom školom Gavro Vuković, na kojoj je profesor ove godine bio predavač. Ostanite uz Prvu televiziju.